Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the MJHA New Books on Japan series. My name is Sara Kang, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. So today I'm thrilled to introduce our main speaker, Hilary Holbrow, who will be speaking on her new book titled The Future is Foreign: Women and Immigrants in Corporate Japan. Hilary Holbrow is assistant professor of Japanese politics and society, a sociologist by training. Her research examines social and economic inequality, work and organizations, immigration, and the intersections of gender, race, and ethnicity. She is an international research fellow at the Cannon Institute for Global Studies in Tokyo, an associate in research at Harvard's Reischauer Institute, and a member of the U.S.-Japan Network for the Future. Her book is available from Cornell University Press. And her previous research has been published in Social Forces, the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of Social Sciences, International Migration Review, Work and Occupations, and Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, among others. Following Dr. Holbrow's presentation of her new book, we'll be hearing from Dr. Ulrike Schaede, who will be serving as our discussant today. Ulrike Schaede is professor of Japanese business at the University of California, San Diego. She teaches at the School of Global Policy and Strategy and is director of the Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology. Her research focuses on Japanese business strategies, management and employment practices, corporate culture, financial markets, manufacturing, and innovation. Latest English books include The Business Reinvention of Japan, published in 2020, and Japan Reemerges 2024, the Japanese versions of which have become bestsellers in Japan. Schaede holds a PhD in Japanese Studies and Economics from Marburg University, Germany, and she has conducted research and teaching at various universities and research institutes in Japan for over 9 years. Thank you for generously agreeing to speak as discussant today. So at the end of our conversation, we will then open the floor up to Q&A in the last half hour or so. And at that time, please feel free to input your questions into the chat or raise your hand, and I will call on you to speak out loud. Okay, Dr. Holbrow, please feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
All right, everyone. Can you hear me and see my screen okay, Sarah?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm really happy to talk to the Modern Japan History Association. I think that secretly history is my favorite discipline, but I'm not smart enough or hardworking enough to be a historian. So I'm just a sociologist, but I'm happy to be able to talk to some historians. Um, I'd like to begin speaking about some of the background for my book. And Sarah asked me not to talk too much. I'll do my best, but it's hard once you get started. So I want to show you here a phenomenon that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, which is Japan's population decline. But I want to show it in a perspective that we don't usually get to see, which is extreme long run perspective. So here we have Japan's population estimated, of course, going all the way back to the year 2000, and then this exponential rise when Japan enters the modern era, followed by a leveling off and now a tiny bit of decline. But what I think is really striking is what we see if we look at the projections for the rest of this century, which is that, because of low birth rates, almost all of this modern population growth is going to simply disappear. And so obviously this is going to reshape Japanese society in profound ways, which I think we can't fully understand, as we are still just experiencing the kind of tip of the population decline iceberg here. Um, but my sort of intrigue and interest in this phenomenon was what initially spurred me to embark on this project. One way that we can see, I think, the immediate effects of population decline most clearly is in the labor market. And we can illustrate this through looking at the population age 20 to 24, which is the age, of course, at which most people enter the labor market for the first time. So we can see here that the population in this age group, there's a spike in the 70s. This is when the baby boomers are entering the labor market. Then there's this echo baby boom in the 1990s as their children come of age, followed by decline. And then you can see like a little bump in the 2000s, which is the very faint second echo of that original baby boom. Um, but what we see here is that in 2010, the population of the age to enter the labor market actually fell to its lowest level since 1947. Uh, and of course, in the intervening decades, Japan's economy has expanded many times over. And Japan is now trying to sustain this economy, which has grown so tremendously, with a smaller and smaller number of new labor market entrants every year. And one way that this trend has been counterbalanced is women's increasing entrance into the labor market. So historically, Japan has had this very distinctive M-shaped curve in women's labor force participation, with women kind of dropping out of the labor market in their 20s and 30s when their children are young and re-entering later. But in the past 25 years or so, uh, Japanese women's labor force participation has increased tremendously. The M curve has really smoothed out. And so this is temporarily, at least, filling the labor gap that is left by these shrinking younger generations. Um, and then, of course, a second source of new labor is the non-citizen population. And this population was notoriously very low until Japan liberalized or at least revised its visa policy and border control in 1990, following which there's been this increase in the foreign population. And we can see here that the pace of that increase has accelerated over time also in response to declining population. So I think this leaves us with several critical areas of inquiry, as there's this seismic shift underway in the Japanese labor market as employers diversify hiring in response to labor shortages and population and decline. But we actually know relatively little about how these people who were either not present at all in the case of foreigners or very much on the margins, like women, how they're faring as they compete in the labor market with Japanese men in greater numbers than ever before. Of course, it's well known that gender inequality is pervasive in the Japanese labor market, but most of the prominent studies that have been published in English kind of reflect conditions prior to 2015 or so, when women's labor force participation rate began to increase particularly rapidly. And also there was a big kind of political push to get more women into management and management track jobs. Um, and then, although there's also tremendous interest in immigrants in Japanese society, until quite recently, almost all of the studies have focused on immigrants in isolation, and I include some of my own earlier work in that as well. So what did I do? I really wanted to place foreign workers in the context of their workplaces. So instead of kind of finding foreign workers to study, I found companies that were very generously willing to give me access to small subsets of their employees. So at each of the 12 companies that generously agreed to participate in my research, I asked them to grant me access to at least two teams that included at least one non-Japanese worker. And so through these 12 companies, I was able to survey 539 employees and then conduct interviews with 15 of those employees. And the sample includes everyone on these teams. So that's Japanese employees, non-Japanese employees, who about 80% of them are from other Asian countries, followed by Western countries. And I conducted this research in 2015. So what this gives me is a very nice opportunity to do a sort of apples to apples comparison between foreign workers and Japanese on the same teams in the same firms. All right. So now I want to talk very briefly about some of the findings from just a few of the chapters, beginning with the first chapter, which is about the work environment. Um, and one based on the survey and then also interviews with mostly the Japanese employees among the interviewees, is that employees generally feel like they have more freedom in comparison to their counterparts during the high growth era. So they report work hours being shorter than in the past. They say they can go home at 7 or 8 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock, not like 10 or 11 in the past. And they also report going out drinking with their coworkers much less often, and describe this as something that is optional that you can partake in if you wish, rather than something that is mandatory. I was especially surprised when I embarked on this research, sort of how positively people talked about job change, and how little pushback they expected from coworkers or managers if they told people that this was something that they wanted to pursue. Uh, at the same time, there's also places where the employers um, kind of still exert quite a bit of control. And in particular, the role of is really important for people's advancement. So, of course, all these companies have very formalized personnel evaluation systems. There's like KPIs and all these metrics along which the employees are rated. Employees often have to set goals, and then they're evaluated on whether they met those goals and so on. But when it comes to getting promoted, many people said that what really matters is what your boss thinks of you and whether your boss is willing to sort of fight for you and having your name be put up for promotion in the next round. Um, and then another area where employer control remains very strong is where you will get placed throughout the company. So certainly the preferences are elicited from the employees, but they don't really have any hope or indeed expectation that the company will abide by their preferences. So that's a little bit about the work environment. And the next chapter, chapter two, talks about how the foreign workers are fitting into that environment. So I was interested in the foreign employees' perceptions of their opportunities in these firms and sort of triangulating among different people's perspectives. This is the basic hierarchy that they described. So they said, Japanese men have the best opportunities, they're the most likely to get promoted. And immigrants are disadvantaged mostly because of their lack of familiarity with Japanese language and culture. And then among immigrants, there was a sense from some people that Western men have a little bit of an advantage because they're sort of more visible. And so they're more likely to be, I think someone used the terms grabbed by executives to take part in important projects and things like this. And interestingly, the immigrants themselves from Asian countries mostly didn't think that there was a big opportunity gap between Asian men and women. And both Asian men and women thought that they had better opportunities in some ways than Japanese women did. But of course, I didn't just have to take people at their word for this because I also collected income data from all the employees, right? So then I can compare what people sort of subjectively expect to the reality. And what I found, to my surprise, was that Western men actually came out on top, that they were earning more even than their Japanese coworkers and that Japanese men and Asian men's earnings adjusted for age were roughly the same. And despite Asian women's kind of optimistic assessments of their opportunities, they were really not any better off than Japanese women. All right. And I'm happy to talk in the Q&A further about sort of why this gap between perception and reality may have occurred. So then I shouldn't have been, but I was somewhat surprised by uh, the really pervasive nature of gender inequality in this context. And of course, there's, a large body of literature on this in English and Japanese, and it often points to kind of bureaucratic reasons why gender inequality might be occurring here. Just differences in the job categories of men and women, difference in their work hours, the fact that women are more likely to take parental leave, and so on. But having collected a lot of information about all of the respondents, I found that these factors really explain only a very small proportion of the gender gap in pay. Um, and this suggests that the inequality is arising not through these more visible bureaucratic mechanisms like what job track you're on, but more through these less visible kind of discretionary decisions that are made by managers and HR, such as, which team you're placed in. Are you placed on a team where you're going to be able to engage in work that's perceived to be high value? And then even within teams, is your manager assigning you tasks which are thought to be valuable? And women in comments referred to this idea of sort of hot jobs, jobs where you have an opportunity to make a big impact. And they said, we feel like we're less likely to get placed in those jobs than men. And then a third striking feature of gender inequality in these companies was that the gender wage inequality was much more severe in the companies where large majorities of ippanshoku or clerical track employees or regular employees were women. And this, I think, has some sort of theoretical implications for how we think about the social construction of bias. And typically, the kind of management studies literature has thought about it like this, that in an organization, there's few women at the top. And so people kind of look to the top of the organizational pyramid and they say, oh, well, there's no women there. So that suggests that women don't have leadership skills. They don't have the capacity to do these type of jobs. But the relationship between uh, women's overrepresentation in low status roles and wage inequality suggests that we perhaps need to pay more attention to what's going on in the bottom of organizational hierarchies. And so it's not just women's absence from the top, but when people see women kind of concentrated in secretarial or support type work, they then tend to think that that's what women are suited towards, or that's what they're good at. Uh, and so one argument that I make in the book is that we need to pay much more attention to what's going on demographically at the bottom of the occupational or organizational hierarchy rather than just at the top. All right. The final chapter that I will talk about very briefly is, I think this is chapter 4, which is about attitudes towards the Asian foreign employees in the companies who are from a mixture of countries, but China, Taiwan, and South Korea are the most represented. And I think this is particularly timely, kind of given the rise in xenophobic rhetoric that we're seeing in Japan right now. So if you ask the Japanese employees to describe their Asian coworkers, they almost always start off by talking about their positive attributes. Saying they're really hardworking, they're hungry to succeed, they ask new and interesting questions, so that they see them as really excellent. But there is a but. And the but is, but they're not good team players. but they care more about their own careers rather than the success of the team. So there was a sense from the Japanese employees that their Asian coworkers were sort of inappropriately self-seeking. Um, I was very interested in this idea that Asian foreign employees in particular had like rule breaking or criminal tendencies because this accusation of foreigners being criminals is one that has a long history in Japan and in many other national contexts as well. And indeed, I did a survey experiment that describes an employee who has broken the rules and asked the respondents to recommend a penalty. And when that employee was listed as having a Chinese or Korean name, the penalties that the non-Asian employees applied to them were indeed harsher, suggesting that there is some influence of this criminality discourse in this context of elite firms. However, interestingly, it wasn't constant across the companies. And indeed, it was entirely absent in the companies that had the highest share of Asian employees on the team. And once again, this wasn't because Asian employees have a positive perception of themselves. This attitude was absent among the Japanese and also the Western employees here, which I think suggests that working together in close proximity with many different people is perhaps helpful for overcoming stereotypes that you might have of that group. And indeed, there was one interviewee in one of these firms or on the teams that had a higher proportion of Asian workers, and he sort of refused to generalize about his Asian coworkers. He was like, well, there's all different kinds, just like there's all different kinds of Japanese. Um, so that I think there's also this sort of opportunity for overcoming bias in this context, which the Asian men and to a lesser extent Asian women enjoy to a greater extent than do Japanese women, perhaps because the negative stereotypes about Asians are not kind of baked into the organizational structure of the firm in the same way that women's disadvantage is. All right. So very briefly, some conclusions. When we think about, in particular, women's disadvantage in Japanese employment, historically, there were all of these kind of bureaucratic mechanisms that excluded women, or just strong norms that women leave the company when they have children, or these kinds of things. So it was pretty universal. But I think that perhaps what has shifted is that women's disadvantage has become less bureaucratized and is more at the discretion of individual managers. And ironically, that means that bias matters more because there aren't as many bureaucratic mechanisms that so automatically work against women. Um, Also, although much prior scholarship emphasizes the importance of managerial representation for reducing bias, I argue that the composition of low-level jobs might be even more important. And then finally, despite popular conceptions of Japan as uniquely xenophobic, gender is a far sharper dividing line in these elite firms than is national origin. And 2 points related to this. I think often in discussions of Japanese management, problems of foreigners and problems of women are treated as two separate things, but they're really not at all. At least in my sample, almost all of the disadvantage experienced by foreigners was disadvantage that was associated with gender. So I think the problems of gender inequality and the problems of immigrant integration are really one and the same. And after all, about half of the immigrants are, of course, women. And then finally, in elite employment settings, like in the rest of the economy, population decline, uh, sort of makes it more costly for firms to discriminate against people. And in that way, it creates opportunities for people who have historically been excluded. But in the context of these elite firms, it seems to be male immigrants who are the best positioned to take advantage of those opportunities. Hence the title of the book, The Future is Foreign. All right, we'll end there.
All right, so Sarah, you want me to take over here? Okay, so well, I, it's a fabulous book. So I've read it cover to cover and enjoyed every single page. It's beautifully written. It's exceedingly well researched. And so congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
It really is very interesting, makes very interesting points. It's and as it's such a great read. I was actually a little nervous whether I would enjoy it as much, but I was like, oh yeah, I have to read about
You
immigration.
know, you're not the first person to say that. I did at one point have it professionally copy edited, and the copy editor is, not a specialist in the field. And he wrote me an email at the end, and he was like, "I thought I would find your book utterly boring, and to my surprise, I didn't." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh God,
So
I hope other
so
people feel the
congratulations.
same." Thank you.
And that was a good investment. So it reads beautifully, and it made me think about things in a different way. So I could stop here, but I think I would be seen as shirking my assignment. So let me make a few comments, and they might come across as pedantic, partially because it's such a great book. But hey, I've got it. Okay, so I actually do have some comments, and I have some questions for you. So the first is that you maybe you brushed over this a little bit, but so basically you spend a very long time in Marunouchi interviewing people in 12 companies and also sending out a survey that yielded 525 responses, something like that, right? And so the book reports on these interviews and then also on the survey results. And the people you interviewed are four groups. So there are Japanese men, Japanese women, and then Asian men and women, and Western men. And the question, of course, is where are the Western women?
Ah.
And your answer will be there weren't any, which is interesting in itself, but I don't think you mentioned them at all in the book.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about them. I thought, well, so I think you could have mentioned them and maybe even argued that had there been any Western women, it would not have changed the story.
hmm
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to still wrap my head around that. So I do know a number of Western women in some of these companies in Marunouchi or Otemachi, and and they are in powerful positions.
hmm
And so we could think that through, and maybe the Western women are just like the Western guys, that
hmm
they are seen as not falling into the hierarchy, and therefore they're not moving the needle at the for the what is the core of your story. But I think not mentioning them, I kind of left me a little bit hanging. Right? So what
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I can just offer some thoughts on that. So in the entire sample of 539 people, there were three Western women, but none of them volunteered to be interviewed. So I have their survey responses. I don't think the three who were in my sample were in powerful positions, but such women do exist in Japan, right? And in these companies. Um, and I am kind of curious to know, I think there's sort of a couple different routes that people take into Japanese companies. And one is you were hired as an entry level, say Shaheen, and you work your way up through the ranks. And my hunch is that that's not how the women in powerful positions landed there. That they kind of built careers in other organizations and then were brought in to the top. You're nodding, shaking your head. So I don't know whether you agree or disagree. So there is a route, right? But it's a very different route than what is experienced by the majority of employees.
Yeah. No, I could see that. I mean, that might be a lawyer that's just a lawyer trained in the US and brought over to, and that sort of thing. Yeah. But it actually that ties into my second sort of this will come across as nitpicky, but so you have these 12 companies and you give them fake names, which I think sociologists do or something. It drove me nuts reading about Henderson and whatnot. And it's like, oh, where is
Uh,
that? Who is that? Who is that? Um, but more substantially to the point, you don't tell us what industries they're in. You give
hmm
us. I'm just looking at page 17. So consumer services, business services,
mm,
manufacturing,
yeah.
and I am wondering maybe if you write a paper about your data, whether you would get some analytical mileage out of putting in industry controls.
hmm
And what I'm thinking about is that if you were to go to Wall Street and look at the role of women in New York working at Goldman Sachs or even foreigners maybe, you might actually find the exact same thing that what you found here.
hmm hmm
Whereas if you went to Silicon Valley, oh no, let me not go there. If you went to maybe your home turf, manufacturing companies in the Midwest, maybe you wouldn't see that.
hmm
Maybe you wouldn't, right?
mm,
The CEO of General Motors is a woman and that sort of thing, and we don't see that in Japan and so on. But I was wondering whether um so I was thinking, oh, is Henderson maybe is that Deloitte or is that is this manufacturing company and who is that and who's this? And you have these citations of these people who say things, and I was trying to map and. I think it would have helped me if you told me this is the manufacturing company guy speaking,
Ah, I
and
see.
this is the finance or accounting guy speaking, or
Yeah.
whatever they are,
Yeah.
trading company guy speaking or something. And because I think those companies are different
hmm
and they have different, well, or not. I mean, that would actually be the query. If you ran your data, so you have some regression analyses there and you try to parse out the differences in salaries and so forth. And I'm wondering if you were to throw the industry variable in, whether you
mm
could actually get some very
mm.
interesting stories.
Yeah. So when I did initially analyze these data for my dissertation, industry was something that I threw into the regressions, and it really didn't yield anything interesting. Like it didn't explain any of the variation. And I think that that is partially to do with the fact that these are all companies at the very pinnacle of the Japanese employment hierarchy. And so just being like very large elite companies, there's certain things that they share which are not industry specific necessarily. Um, I went back and forth about how much to reveal about them, but ultimately because there's people in the companies who know exactly who the respondents are, I felt that I had to err on the side of making it really difficult to identify people. So I think you're right. There's some analytical leverage that is lost in making that choice. But I think that that was what was necessary to sort of protect the privacy of the people involved because, there's, someone, Tanaka-san in HR is the person who gave me the list of the 35 employees at the company. And so if I say, like, this is an accounting guy who's 35, they're going to be like, oh, that's Suzuki-san. So I
Yeah.
couldn't reveal too much there.
No, yeah, yeah, I understand that, but that so that for me as a reader, that was a little bit disengaging that I actually didn't know. But maybe yeah, I don't know how you came up with these names. So some of these were English names, and so it's like, oh, I don't want to read about Henderson. Anyway, that's just on the side. Um, um, you have fabulous data on everybody. If you pick up the book, page 51 to 54, you actually have a really nice update on overall workforce data. And I was just thinking, oh, I would have loved to see charts about this. So if you have these data and charts, would you please share them with me? That would be that would be great. And I'm
Hmm.
actually thinking of giving those 3 pages to my students. I'm teaching a Japanese business class right now, and it's a really nice succinct update of the total workforce data and you show how the male employees were down, but the female employees actually made that up, and how the role of the women is not, I mean, they're not getting these they're not getting over the image thing.
Hmm.
And I think your point about the assignment. So let's talk about the women for a moment. And then I want to
Hmm.
go to the foreigners. So I've heard this story that you tell, so I can confirm that it's absolutely true, and I think it's true everywhere in the world, that if the women don't lean in and get or even if they do in Japan, that's a problem, and get difficult assignments, they don't have an opportunity to show how good they are. And I've had students and visitors that, a young woman at TEPCO was a civil engineer and wasn't asked to build the bridge, right? And if you're not asked to build the bridge, nobody assumes that you can build a bridge, right? And so, and that was very frustrating. And even at a company like that, that was actually trying to help and promote women and so forth. And it came back to exactly the way you tell the story, which is that the boss makes the assignments, and the boss may actually be even well-meaning and say, "Oh, Suzuki-san, your child is only 3 years old. Let me not give you the tough job so that you can go home early," right? And they might actually think that they're doing the right thing. That is sort of the interesting part of the story, that not all of this is necessarily some Oji-san behavior where they can't get over some Showa period way of thinking. It's actually in this new world, I don't, I don't, I want to be helpful because we're supposed to help the women, right? And so let me, and actually that's a question, two parts of the question. And one is, um, in this setting, is leaning in really not also a challenge, right?
Hmm.
And I've heard this from HR departments that they want to push the women, and then when it comes to saying, who would like to go abroad or who would like to take on this assignment, the women are sometimes too slow to respond, or too timid to respond, or too and in your interviews you see this too, right? And I was thinking, oh, so here's Hillary interviewing a Chinese woman who says, "I'm not being promoted, I'm much better than what I am." And you talk to a Japanese woman and she might say, "Well, it was unfortunate that the promotion didn't happen, the assignment didn't happen." And there's this kensoku and being nice and not want to be seen as rocking the boat and those sort of things. And so I'm wondering whether that plays into this, right? So that it's not just the boss.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was something that kind of came up in the conversations with the women from other Asian countries the most. And part of the reason that I think they felt like they were going to have better opportunities than Japanese women, because they said, I am leaning in, right? As you just said, like I am hungry for promotion. I want to climb my way up the ladder. Uh, but as you say, that's not enough. So as much as they had, confidence in their ability to climb the ladder, if you look at the positions that they actually obtain, um, it's no different from the Japanese women. So one thing that was very puzzling to me was, where does this gap emerge from, right? Like uh, why are the women so confident that if they're hungry for it, they can achieve it, and yet that doesn't reflect the reality. Um, and I think there's a couple things going on, and one is precisely that narrative from HR. So HR is always giving this answer that, like, oh, it's women that don't want to be promoted. That's why there's no women. And I'm very skeptical that that's actually true. But even people in the context of the firm will believe that. So they're like, well, if I'm ambitious, then I can be promoted. Uh, but I think that in a way, especially for the Asian women, the long time horizons to promotion makes it difficult to see that for a long time. And so by the time that you realize that you are falling behind in this very visible marker of promotion, you've already invested like 10 or 15 years in the company. Um, and most of the people in my sample kind of hadn't gotten to that point of realization yet.
Mm.
Uh, so that said, is there some gap in the position that women want to reach in general relative to men? And this actually wasn't really something that I was able to answer from the survey data that I collected for this project. But in more recent data collection in Japanese companies, I have asked people, what is the highest rank that you want to achieve? And there is a gender gap in this, but it's surprisingly small. And it's way smaller than the gap in actual promotion outcomes. So I think,
I I totally believe that
yeah,
100%, because they're
like
working
most,
at the top companies, right? So
yes, yeah, yeah,
they're hyper educated. They've made it all the way into these top tier companies. They're not there to twiddle their thumbs. I mean,
right, yeah.
yeah, and it's very frustrating. I mean, I've heard the so we run a program at UC San Diego called Jump, Jose for upper management, and so companies actually send people so that we kind of network and introduce them to American CEOs and coaching and that story is the one story that I've heard repeatedly. The boss, whether they want to be kind or not. The second story I've heard, which actually that surprised me perhaps even more, is that there is well, at least at the time when you were doing the research, so 8, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, well, COVID changed things a little bit, maybe, a concern on how one would mentor women
Mm,
employees. And part of the reason that the settai, the sort of the izakaya and going to drink for mentoring, part of the reason that that's gone away is that in the old days, the Showa period, the department chief would say, well, in the morning we do whatever, deal with internal stuff. In the afternoon we deal with a customer, and in the evening I'll coach you over a beer. Right? And there's
hmm.
mentoring, and in today's meeting you shouldn't have spoken when you spoke, and that sort of thing. And we really, that was the pattern, right? I mean, not always, but often. And then so there's an anxiety about how to mentor women. And what I was particularly surprised by is that in our program, what I heard is that women were nervous about how to mentoring women.
Hmm.
That they wondered whether there was a different standard, whether, they didn't want to be, of course, the guys don't want to be accused of sekohara and all of that. And would the same apply? And so many companies have actually shifted the mentoring to the afternoon or a weekly meeting, something much more normal than a beer place. And And so, you know, part of the conversations I've had with those women was that what it takes to be a good mentee, not just being a good mentor, right? Being a good mentee, give the boss an
Mm,
opportunity to tell you how to do better. And I think those are all just very new. And
interesting.
because they're new, they're not sort of, there's no pattern. And of course, it's Japan, so if there's no pattern, I don't know what to do. What do I do? I'll say nothing or something.
Yeah.
So,
One thing that makes me think of that was really interesting in the data, but didn't actually make it into the book, um, was how little trust even the Japanese employees have that they can believe what their company tells them about the sort of systems of mentoring and evaluation, and that I mean, this happens in organizations everywhere, that there's the way that things work on paper and there's the way that things work in reality. Um, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like 86% of the Japanese respondents said, I can believe what the company tells me less than half of the time. Right? That's a terrible trust gap. And I don't think I actually looked at whether there was a gender difference in there, but I wouldn't be at all surprised uh,
mm.
if there was. So, if I wanted to dig further into that in the data, there might be some interesting insights there.
So the other point that you make that I actually had, you know, so that rings totally true, is the acculturation and the foreigners and will the foreigners fit. So I have some students, American students, who after graduation went to Japan and started working for Japanese companies. And so over the years, I've followed up with them. And one common theme is indeed that they report that there's ijime, basically gaijin ijime or something. And the way it plays, of course, it's Japan, everybody is so polite and so forth. So how does this play out? The way it plays out, according to my super small set, but I think you write about it a little bit, so I want you to talk a little bit more about that. So in the cases I know, so these are Americans that go to a Japanese company, but somehow there's this idea that they have to do the exact same on the job rotations as the Japanese. So in one case, he was asked to write the notes for the meeting in Japanese. This is before ChatGPT. Today, this would be easy, right? You just give it to Chat, you take the notes and then it spits it out, and here you go. But this is about 10 years ago, and or so, and so this student spent enormous amounts of time writing notes for a meeting that a Japanese could have done it in 10 minutes. It took him
Mm,
3 hours. He said, why would they not give me an assignment that actually plays into my skill set? And why would they give me an assignment that does not play into my skill set? And so we could be understanding and say, well, it's Japan and everybody has to go through the same rotation. And you want to be a salaryman in Japan, you have to learn these things. Or we could be cynical and say, well, let's set him up for failure. And you touched a little bit on this, and I want to invite you to talk because you didn't cover this in the
mm,
presentation. So talk a
mhm,
little bit about what you found there, because I think this ijime is so there is a law. The law says you must not do this, and you can't do that, and it's all nice, and we're a happy family. But then there's the reality of workplace, you know, sort of
mm,
differentiation.
mhm.
Call it.
Hmm. Yeah. So there is certainly a narrative in the firms, and also, we're seeing this in society more broadly, if foreigners don't understand the rules properly, they don't know the right way of doing things, and we just have to like educate them properly, um, and these problems will go away. But that education can take a form that is very frustrating, right? And is not necessarily really sort of developmental education. Uh, like, is this guy that you're talking about, is he really learning a lot by writing the notes for the meeting? No, not really. Um, and so I think that when you say we just want to teach people how it's done properly, yeah, that sounds very nice, but how does it work in practice? And there is often kind of a gap there. But interestingly, so when you talk to the foreign employees themselves, they often talk about language and culture being the biggest barriers. And this is true even for people who are like really fluent in Japanese. So mostly not people from Western countries, but people from other Asian countries as well. Um, they say there's just like a small part that I don't get. But then if you look at sort of who's the most successful at obtaining parity, it's not actually the people who are the most acculturated. So there's this kind of a false promise, I think, of if you do everything right, you'll then be rewarded. But that's not actually how it works out on paper.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the frustration, and then they leave, which is what the coworkers maybe aren't it? We don't know. Because the guy
Well,
did competition, as you
yeah,
point out, right? The white guy is competition. And
mm.
so the young white guy comes in and they give him assignments that he cannot, in that sense, actually, not so different from women.
Well, I do want to play devil's advocate a little bit here, and just say that, I think that Japanese employees also experience the same treatment of being given really tedious, irksome tasks to just sort of like see if you can hack it. So it's not like, oh, we're trying to drive the foreign employee out, but that there is this kind of process of hazing that everyone goes through.
Yeah.
And I think that the foreign employees sometimes falsely believe that that's really like about them being foreigners, when in fact it's not. Although the fact that they are foreigners, gives it a particular style or flavor.
So that brings up another question. And you mentioned Tenshoku, how job changing is now actually not only possible, actually, I'm a little bit concerned that it is becoming fashionable, which, not without its own dangers. But here's a question, and it really is a question. Do you think you should have written that entire book in the past tense? And what I mean
Mm-hmm.
with that, I mean, so this is like the Harvard Business case style. So, I wrote some for the Harvard Business School, and I interviewed the CEO. I sit down, I write it, and I said, no, you have to write this in the past tense. And I said, this happened today. They said, no, 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 no. By the time people read it, it will be old. And so the changes are like enormous, right? It's a really fast pace, and this whole Tenshoku thing has actually opened opportunities for these people that think they're being hazed or whatever they think, right? Or ijimade, and so they want to they could leave,
Mm-hmm.
and no longer is this lifetime employment thing a straitjacket.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would you say about and the women too? It's changing fast. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
not. I don't know. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to
Uh,
what extent do you think this should have been, not that it's a history book. I mean, the historians in the room are kind of smiling, but it's not, I mean, it's obviously current, but what would be the advice for other people
mm-hmm.
who write a book about these sort of semi-current topics? I mean, myself included. I mean, should we
Right.
write this in the past tense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I thought a lot about. And I was frankly, it took me a long time to write the book. Here it is, 2026. I was collecting my data mostly in 2015 for the project. And I have since then been able to collect more data from Japanese companies, which I think actually underscored a lot of things that didn't change that much, particularly with regard to gender inequality. Like I think that whole piece still holds, and there have been some changes with like remote work, COVID, of course, like decimated nomikai at least temporarily. Um, for a while, even compared to the period that I was studying. So I don't want to say like nothing has changed since I've written the book. That's obviously not true. Um, but I think many of the things, so I talk about job change, and that has intensified. Um, so I think there's a lot of space for kind of new research in the area of fluidity in the Japanese labor market. Um, but I guess our knowledge doesn't get updated that quickly, unfortunately. And I think you were maybe not unique, but unusual in how close you are to the field, right? So you can see those changes on the ground much more rapidly than most people can. Um,
Mm.
and uh I think it's a balance, right? Um, because I want to have really good data, and it takes a while to collect and analyze such data. Uh, but you can't do that overnight. So you have to keep watching. I try to still like follow all of these issues. But also there's something that is not uh you can't do a study like this overnight either. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question,
No,
but
no, it's
some thoughts I have on it.
it's a little bit of a trick. So, Sarah, I'm kind of looking at you. We don't even let you get it. But I have two more things. But my guess is you want the audience to join us here. But can I ask my two more things, or is
Yeah, go ahead.
okay? So, I want to end up on the title of the book. But before I go there, I have this one other thing where I was a little bit confused. So, you talk
Mm.
about the Asian workers. The Asian immigrants, and by the way, your PowerPoints are like, award winning. I mean, especially that last
Oh.
slide, that was like amazing. But the Asian immigrants, you said, are not suffering is too strong a word, but are not experiencing the same sort of trouble as the Japanese women, where your argument is that um, because there is this preconceived notion of what a woman worker does. She makes tea and she makes this and she makes this. And that preconceived notion doesn't exist for the Asian office workers because Japan has for so long not let Asians in. And so they are not associated with low-level jobs like making tea. I'm wondering whether that's true. So we currently
Mm.
see, so there was a former PhD student here in sociology at UC San Diego who wrote about the fishing, the canneries, the, sort of, it's a really bad job. And basically, who works in these factories where they put sardines into cans? And the answer is old women and young Asian
Mm.
immigrants
Hmm.
on training visas, right?
Mm.
And he laid that out beautifully. So there are low-level jobs that could be associated. And then, of course, I'm thinking of the convenience store and so it's visible in
Yeah.
Tokyo that there is a particular type of job that it's a little bit like the donut store in the US, right? So there was a time, I don't know if this is still true, but there was a time when 65% of donut stores in the US were run by Cambodians. And donuts are not a, a feature of Cambodian cuisine. It's just running a donut store means you have to get up early in the morning and it's hard work and you can do it without speaking the language, sort of thing, right? And so I think the convenies are giving us an image of what a Asian immigrants or even South Asian immigrants work
Mm.
might be, right? And so what would
Mm.
you say to that?
Mm, yeah. So I do think that that is something that has changed quite a bit in the past 10 years, like since I was collecting the data for the book. So as you say, I'm making an argument that maybe the biases towards the East Asian workers in the firms are a little bit more unstable because they're not founded on the same like level of everyday interaction, like the bias against the women. I would still argue that even if you're shopping at a convenience store where the clerk is from China, that is not the like same intensity of interaction that you're experiencing within the company itself. Um, but I do think that as that kind of like low level service the presence of foreigners in that type of low level service job, their visibility has increased. And so that maybe creates slightly less opportunity for the biases to be destabilized in the white collar workplace, like I described.
Mm, mm. Well, and it is true that if you look, I actually don't know. I haven't looked at the garbage people, but if you look at like tree cutters in the streets of Tokyo, so they look Japanese.
Yeah.
So we do, right? And so yeah, yeah. So okay. So my final thing, and then we want to, let Sarah tell us how to, I'm sure the audience is kind of, burning to get in, but the title. So, I mean, at first I thought, are you being cynical? Are you, what are you doing here with us? Are you pulling our leg? And it's a great title. I'm not saying it's a bad title, but for me, and for me, the part about the women is just so much more powerful in some ways than the part about the immigrants. And this, of course, puts you into, well, it says
Mm.
women there. It does say women there. Um, but there's a certain cynicism in this, right? So women, forget it. You will even the immigrants from Asia are doing better than you all. I'm not sure whether you meant that, or can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So how did I decide on the title? Well, for one thing, I like it because it's provocative. Like it's not what you would expect. For another thing, this is a little bit of a stupid reason, but I was thinking about titling the book "The Future Is Not Female." Um, but I opted against that because there's actually already a book written about Japan, the title of which is Japan's Far More Female Future. So that space was already taken. So there were these not really like intellectual reasons for the title. Um, but I think it also, in addition to referencing the argument that it's the immigrant men who have the most opportunity in these elite firms, I think it also speaks to the sort of uncertainty about Japan's future more generally in light of population decline and the unpredictable ways in which that may transform society. So it's also an allusion to that at the same time.
Mm, I actually don't think the title is right. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe I'm a little, I mean, you were in the thick of this for so long, but the women I'm talking to in these workplaces, I think they are they are slowly but certainly sort of, that would be another question, but I really we should get the audience involved. But one of the on my question list I have whether these women are networking in a different way than the guys and in
Mm.
ways that
Hmm.
and I think that's certainly true in the US. Right? We are
Mm.
not as good at networking than the corporate guys often.
Hmm. Interesting.
For reasons that we could write another whole PhD thesis about. But I'm seeing this in Japan as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know no I don't know very much qualitatively about the networking. Like I did ask some questions about that in the survey, but I don't think that it could get at the type of difference that you're talking about. And that was another thing that didn't really make it into the book. So I should look and see what else is there. I do, you were saying you don't think the title is right. I do want to defend my title a bit more and say that I don't mean to imply that women don't have more opportunity than in the past. They certainly do. Um, However, relative to their presence in the workplace, those opportunities are greater for the immigrant men. So I want to make that clear as well.
Yeah, it's a great title. I'll step out for just a second. The sun just set, so I have to turn my lights on. But I'll be
Okay.
here.
All
So
right.
I'll
I'm
let
happy
Sarah take
to
over.
take questions from the audience now.
Yeah, I think we can now turn to the Q&A session. Um, so if you have a question, you can raise your hand and feel free to speak, or I can also read out the question from the chat. I see something from Jen Bardsley, so I can start with that. So Jan asks, do the Asian immigrant workers seek to live in Japan for their whole careers, or do many plan to use their Japan experience for a leg up back home?
Thank you. That's a great question. There is actually a table in the book, I think, about people's future stay intentions. Um, and uh, oh, I see it's divided up by different categories of foreign workers, but basically, it, yeah, so it depends kind of on when people arrived in Japan. And the younger someone arrived, the more likely they are to say that they want to stay there permanently or perhaps live transnationally between Japan and their home country. Um, and I would say it was around like 40% or so who said, I definitely want to settle in Japan permanently. And then approximately another 30% who said, I want to retain a connection to Japan, but live transnationally between Japan and my home country. And then another third who said, I want to return to my home country for sure. Uh, in general, the foreign workers in my sample had a pretty high level of Japanese language skills,
Mm.
um, and had made pretty deep investments in Japan. So they did not see it as a stepping stone for the most part.
Obviously, that's very interesting. I really enjoyed your discussion tonight, and I wondered too, because there's so many more Chinese students enrolling in Japan, in Japanese universities, rather than perhaps going to the United States. Do you think that the amount of Asian women will that are applying for these companies is going to increase?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that for people coming from China, there are now increasingly more push factors than there were when I originally did this research. That people disillusioned with Xi Jinping and the
Mhm.
CCP looking for a way out, and the door to the U.S. has closed a bit in recent years. So Japan is a closer option. I think the same pull Japan has had continuously for a number of decades had the same pull factors of being a safe country. It's close to China. There's a sense that it's reliable. It's a nice place to live. And that hasn't really changed in spite of recent political tensions. But the push factors have intensified. And so, I think this trend will continue.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll let
Thank
other
you.
people ask questions now.
Miss Jesper.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Hilary. Great
Hi.
presentation. Hi, Ulrike. I remember seeing you present this work at Waseda a number of years ago when you were doing it, so it's great to see it's out in the book. Um, I maybe you covered this, and I'm sorry I joined a little bit late and I couldn't remember. But do you have in your sample foreign-owned firms, or are these all Japanese firms? Are there Gaishke in here, or is it all Japanese?
Mm, Yeah, nice to see you again, Jesper. Yeah, Jesper was one of the many people who sort of helped me get immersed in the field while I was working on this research. So I'm very grateful. Um, it was all Japanese firms. Gaishike were not included. And that wasn't a matter of sampling design, really. That was just those were the companies that agreed to allow me to participate in this research. Um, I think that it might be the case that so I was selling this to the companies as, this is an opportunity to see how well you're doing in utilizing foreign talent. And I think maybe Gaishike companies felt less insecurity about that, and
Right.
so therefore would be less likely to want to participate in the research.
So I guess my follow-up question is, do you have any sense from your ongoing research or in general, to what extent these effects are also true for Gaishke. Because I mean, we talk
Mm,
about foreign-owned firms, but even foreign-owned firms here are usually staffed, say 70, 80% by Japanese people, right? And
right.
so is this an organizational thing so that once you're in the Gaishke, it doesn't happen so much, or is it a broader Japanese cultural effect, in which case you would probably see something similar in these
Mm,
foreign well.
mm. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. But kind of even in my ongoing research, there's only one Gaishike firm that I have collected extensive data on, and so I'm hesitant to generalize from that one firm about Gaishike versus Nikkei. And I would just refer people back to Hiroshi Ono's American Sociological Review article, where he finds that gender inequality is much less severe in Gaishike firms than it is in Japanese-owned firms. So I suspect that these patterns do not hold
Right.
in Gaishike, but I can't answer that in a database manner one way or another. Um, it would be interesting to find out.
So I was actually just going
Because
to ask Jesper whether you have a suspicion on how that has changed, and I would throw in on the Ono piece. Yeah, but the majority of Gaishike are finance. And
Mm,
that goes back to this industry control. I think that it actually really makes a difference what industry we're in, and that the financial industry, I don't know, it could cut either way, that they're more discriminatory or less. I don't know, but
mm,
a lot of the gaishike where if they're like Goldman Sachs or something like that, they would come with their own dynamics. But yes, but do you have any speculation of what that would look like today?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing is that you have the Goldman Sachs and so on, but they are outliers in the Gaishikei. There are lots of foreign firms here. Most of them are not, high-flying investment banks. And a lot of them actually operate in fairly similar ways as Japanese firms. Not the exact same, but more similar in manufacturing and retail and so on. And I wonder if there's also maybe a selection there that if you're going to be a foreign worker here, would it make more sense for you to come and work for a gaishike in Japan, right? It's still the same labor
mm.
market. Those firms also still need people on the ground.
So,
But no, I don't have any empirics as well, but I would agree with Hilary that it probably is somewhat different in those firms. Also because
so
they're
I
yeah, go ahead.
one thing that I do want to say about Gaishike is that a lot of the foreign employees said that they want to move to Gaishike. This was an aspiration for them. So, I think there is a sense that you can maybe have a higher salary. You can have quicker upward mobility in those companies. So that was something that was appealing to a lot of the foreign employees in the sample. That
Yeah,
said, they're a tiny share of the overall labor market, right? So many people
that's
can
true.
want to go to Gaishike, but few can succeed. And so, some the people that I interviewed, where I know their real names, I can like continue to follow them on LinkedIn. And they all said they wanted to move to Gaishike, but none of them actually have in the
Mm.
intervening years.
So if I could add one more footnote to this. So a colleague of mine, or friend, acquaintance, shifted from a typical Japanese HR department to Amazon Japan in the HR department. And this was like a couple of months ago. And she reports that it's a different life. She has much more energy. And the main thing, other than higher salary, is empowerment. That
Mm,
that in the Japanese place, whenever she wanted to make a change, she had to go to the boss, and the boss had to go to the boss, and let's see and make sure, and Anzen Daiichi and all these processes. And in the new place, she has an idea, wants to make a change, and the boss says, "Well, if you want to do it, go. Why are you asking me?"
mm,
And so, and it's empower. We were actually, this kind of ties back to this what we talked about earlier, the opportunity to make a difference, and often for women in Japanese companies, that opportunity seems to be, for whatever reason, not as easily reachable. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was interesting to hear the foreign employees talk about their image of Gaishike, and this idea that you would have more autonomy was in addition to the high salary part of the appeal. Um, and I think the idea came up again and again in the interviews in the Japanese firms of the culture of things having to be perfect, um, which is very burdensome to the foreign employees who feel that perfection is an unreasonable standard. But in some ways, that's like the strength of Japanese companies, right? That they're not producing something sloppily. So some of the Japanese employees then complain about the foreign employees doing things in a very slipshod, below standard manner. So I think that's kind of the downside of like do whatever you want, right?
but one of the things about immigration that works so well in Japan is I think this process that has been established of self-selection. Right? So there isn't a requirement, not just an expectation, but a requirement that you learn some basic Japanese, which is of course a beast of a language. And then there is all kinds of other things you have to do, and you have to be able to thoroughly, separate your garbage on the right days and whatnot, right? So follow the rules and the manners and whatnot. And so I would expect that the people who work in these companies have already self-selected for being totally, not totally, but quite understanding of the necessity to do things perfectly and to wait until it's your turn and that sort of thing, right? Did you
Hmm.
observe that at all with these people that you interviewed, that they were actually sort of that they had bought into those corporate
Mm.
cultures?
Mm. Um, there were some people who really had. I'm thinking of one of the interviewees who was a Chinese woman working in one of the companies, and I asked her like, what is necessary for you to succeed in your company? And she was like, oh, it's to do my work perfectly. And she was like, and of course I will do that, and then I will succeed. So she was kind of I think, the prime example of that phenomenon, although she was somewhat unusual in that regard. And she was well known in the broader sort of Chinese employee community. Like other people at other companies knew of her and were like, oh yeah, her. uh, so there's variation. I think she was a extreme case of that.